Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm going to take you back on a journey to the origins of the crypto revolution, which is actually a cornerstone of Web3 development. So in 2020, I started my journey and I started to investigate which investment strategy is the best one for me personally. So since the US economy is supposedly the best or the strongest economy in the world, I checked how much profit I would have made if I invested into the S&P 500 at the peak of the dot-com bubble. I would have made a profit of 250%, which looks quite nice, but comparing this against the monetary inflation, I actually made a loss. So I was surprised about this, but remembered a quote of Mark Twain saying, "A favorite theory of mine is that no occurrence is sole and solitary, but is merely a repetition of a thing which has happened before and perhaps often." So I checked out if we had similar examples throughout history regarding money devaluation, and I found a lot of examples. One is the Roman Empire. So here you can see a Roman denarius over a time span of 300 years. Devaluing coins like this caused prices for goods and services, of course, to soar. So the Roman Emperor Diocletian introduced the price cap policy in 284 AD to fight the consequences of those soaring prices. But as always, it didn't help the problems. Instead, the Roman Empire had people starting to trade on the black market. There was a decline in production and trade, social unrest, and finally the Roman Empire couldn't pay their troops anymore, and it collapsed when the Germanic tribe invaded them. A similar example, in the Weimar Republic in 1920, you can see in the graph that one paper mark in 1917 had the same purchasing power as 1 trillion paper marks in 1924. This is because when Germany came out of the First World War, they had to pay compensation to the affected countries. And to do this, they simply just printed more paper money, which resulted into a very poor nation, and that was one of the main causes of the Second World War. At the same time, there was a crisis happening in the US, the Great Depression. So President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, in which he outlawed the possession of gold. Subsequently, 1 year later, they raised the gold price from $20 per ounce to $35 per ounce. Why did they do this? So apparently a lot of people were not aware of this, which surprised me, but actually back then, and it should still be like this, the money supply was coupled to the gold reserve the government had in their Federal Reserve banks. So by increasing the gold into their reserves and raising the price artificially, they allowed themselves to bring more money into circulation. 1944, some economists all over the world said, well, we actually need to control money supply. So 44 countries agreed on the following rules. We should have a fixed gold price. It shouldn't raise anymore. We should have fixed exchange rates against the US dollar, and everyone who wants to change their exchange rates needs to apply to the International Monetary Fund. However, less than 40 years later, we witnessed already the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. President Nixon announced a temporary suspension of the convertibility of US dollar into gold, and this temporary suspension is still going on today. So people also refer to the beginning of the currency war when they speak about this event. Why did they do this? Well, the US was importing more goods and services than exporting. So they exported their money, and with that, their inflation. President Nixon said, because foreign holders of those US dollars, especially in Europe and French people, they noticed that there was just a lot of US dollars in circulation. So they said, we want to exchange our US dollars against gold. And that was depleting the nation's gold reserve. So President Nixon then said, well, these are speculative attacks on our nation, and we need to protect the US citizens from those attacks. However, if the US government had sustained the right gold reserve, there wouldn't be an issue in returning the gold back to the foreign dollar holders. So this is the graph that shows how this affected the monetary inflation in the US. Since 1971, it increased by 70 times. In the UK, since 1987, it increased by 10 times. This is, by the way, actually, the house price index increased by the same amount, 10x, since the time 1987. So we should stop talking about housing bubbles and start talking about money bubbles. This is the inflation in Turkey, 56 times since 2006. And another extreme example, Zimbabwe had a money supply increase of 51,000 times since 2009. They had the same ideas as the Romans, and they introduced price cap policies on goods and services, but obviously, as you can see in the graph, it didn't help. This clicker is a bit annoying. Okay, so money has 7 attributes it should fulfill. One is that it should serve as a store of value. But our money clearly doesn't do that. So I was wondering, what is money if it doesn't fulfill the attributes of money? I came across 2 different terms, which is currency and fiat. Fiat is Latin and stands for so be it. I found this a much better word for what we are having and dealing with. Fiat, and that's why I refer only to fiat from now on. So fiat is highly liquid and essential for short-term transactions. So it's our medium of exchange. It's a means for government taxation, and very important to note, it works in favor for wealthy people. Here you see a graph. The red line shows the rich, wealthy people. They are protected from monetary inflation because their assets value correlate with the money supply, while not wealthy people, shown in blue, they can't keep up with money supply. The difference between those two is that wealthy people actually don't keep fiat money, but they buy assets. And then they get loans, cheap loans, to buy more assets, and some of them will never pay those loans back, but they just refinance them until death. This is a methodology which is referred to as buy, borrow, die. Historically, we had also other forms of money, which wasn't only gold or fiat, but for example, feathers, shells, or those massive raystones. This is actually my favorite one. Producing those stones or shells required a lot of labor and time, so in some way it was better than fiat because it served as a store of value. Furthermore, everyone could produce this, so it was much more fair than having fiat money. However, like fiat, those commodities are not durable, and especially those stones, they're not very portable. So that's why we luckily had Satoshi Nakamoto come along and giving us a present, which he called Bitcoin. In the first Bitcoin block ever mined, he added a message to us. He added a message for us. It was the header of the Times, and it said, "Chancellor on the brink of second bailouts for bank." So he was hinting towards a broken monetary system we are living in. No one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and it doesn't really matter because the protocol is open source and it's based on mathematics and cryptography. It's similar to Euclid, who invented geometry. We don't care if Euclid was a good or bad guy because we can just verify geometry and we know that it works. So Bitcoin has 2 attributes to solve the issues which I mentioned before: store of value, portability and durability. So first, Bitcoin is scarce. So we will never have more than 21 million Bitcoin, which makes it a long-term store of value for us. Second, it's decentralized. That means all transactions are stored on a blockchain, which are stored on millions of independent miners and nodes. And even if those miners and nodes go down, we still have them stored on satellites. So Bitcoin is highly durable. Furthermore, Bitcoin miners can verify transactions 24/7 worldwide, so it's highly portable. With decentralization also comes inclusiveness. So if someone wants to join the Bitcoin network in any shape, they don't have to ask anyone to be part of the network. So it's permissionless, and this will help the 40% of the people worldwide that doesn't have access to financial infrastructure. Furthermore, decisions are not taken anymore by a group of selected people, but its decisions are driven by mass adoption of verifiable software upgrades. And my last point is Bitcoin is not just money and the payment system, it's also a technology with a lot of different use cases. So for example, we could use the heat of Bitcoin miners to warm greenhouses or residential homes. And this has already been done by a pilot project of Marathon Bitcoin Miner in Finland. They are currently heating 11,000 houses with Bitcoin miners. It could be used for power grid balancing or electrification of poorer countries, as it has been done by Hydrobox in Kenya. Or it could be used, for example, for identity verification, as it has been suggested by MicroStrategy. So I just pressed a talk that normally takes 50 minutes into 10 minutes.